Bonjour à toutes et tous, vous écoutez First Print, votre podcast comics préféré pour un nouveau numéro de l'émission Super Friends qui va à la rencontre des artisans, des personnes qui font vivre la culture comics et la pop culture par leur travail. Aujourd'hui, c'est un Super Friends particulier puisqu'il sera fait en VO, donc en anglais, et nous avons l'honneur de recevoir l'un des plus grands coloristes de cette industrie de la bande dessinée américaine. Il a travaillé avec des noms très importants, avec Jeff Lemire, avec Alan Moore, avec Jae Lee, avec J.H. Williams III. Et aujourd'hui, donc, on le reçoit surtout pour parler d'un certain travail qu'on a déjà abordé dans notre podcast qui s'appelle Infidel, donc de Pornsak Pichetshote et Aaron Campbell, dont il a été à la fois coloriste et éditeur. Je vous le donne en mille. Donc, notre invité du jour, c'est José Villarrubia, qu'on est très très heureux d'accueillir aujourd'hui. L'émission va commencer donc en anglais et on espère qu'elle vous plaira. N'hésitez pas à nous faire vos retours à la fin. Hello, José, how are you?
Oh, bonjour, I'm very happy to be here.
It's not the first time that you've been here, but for our audience, it will be the first time that they hear you in the podcast. So you can speak a little bit French. So let's just say a few words in French. What can you tell us?
Bah, la seule chose que je te peux dire est que je parlais très mal.
Donc voilà, pour celles et ceux qui nous écoutent, on a fait une première version de ce podcast en français, mais c'est vrai que c'était peut-être un peu difficile de bien comprendre. Donc pour la fluidité de la conversation, on préfère vous le faire en anglais. Donc voilà, pour vous parler donc de couleurs et d'édition et de Infidel et de tout un tas de choses. Donc allons-y. So I've got a very trivial question for the beginning, José. Can you just tell us about you, about what made you decide that you wanted to work in the comic book industry?
Oh, I grew up reading comics. All of my generation, everybody read comics. As you know, in Spain, like in France, there are children comics, and children read comics, and so it's not like in the States where children comics have not been a thing for many years. So I read comics growing up like everybody, and then I continued to hold on a second.
Mm-hmm.
I continued to read comics through my adolescence, and then I never stopped. So I always read comics. I always loved comics, and I always loved to draw. And comics seemed to be the art form that interested me the most. So I didn't know what it took to be a comics artist, but as early as 12, I was doing comic drawings and drawing comics and so forth. And really, I mean, I became other things, but being a comic artist is all I ever wanted to be.
Okay, so but what do you think that a comic book is? Let me rephrase it. Why is a comic book for you really the most interesting form of art?
It's not the most interesting form of art. It's the thing that I like the most in terms of making. I think that the thing that interests me about comics is that it combines art and story in a way that I love illustration and I love literature, of course. And I think that other mediums like animation and film also combine the visual with the narrative. But I feel that comics can be done very cheaply and by one or two people. And there is no special effects budget. So you can do anything that you can dream. Anything you can dream, you can draw. And it doesn't cost any more to draw something expensive than something normal. So I love the versatility of the medium, and I love the power to create worlds and entertain of the medium. And I feel that I really wanted to be a part of that when I was growing up. And I didn't know if I would be able to or not. I tried. When I was 18, I applied to Marvel and DC once I moved to the States. And I was rejected. But years later, I began to work after I was already I had become a painter and a college professor, and I started to work in coloring, which I never expected to do, and I've been working pretty much all the time for 25 years now.
So you decided to move in the United States because you wanted to make a living in the American comic book industry?
No, I decided to come to the United States because I wanted to study in the United States. I was studying in the University of Madrid. I was studying fine arts, and I felt it was very old-fashioned and very limited. And the classes were huge. There were like 80 students per class. And I never even met my teachers. And I thought I was wasting my time. So I transferred my credits and I came to the States to a really good art school. And I stayed here. After I studied, I did a master's degree after I did a bachelor's degree. And after I got a master's, I got a job teaching in the university. So it was very smooth. But it wasn't because of comics. It was because of art education.
Okay. So what were your first contacts with artists that when you started to do the coloring books? How did you get into the field?
Well, I had met comic artists already, but the first artist that asked me to do coloring was my friend Jae Lee. Jae was an artist that worked for Marvel, and I curated a show. I organized a show of local comics artists here in Baltimore, and he was one of the people I invited, and we became good friends. And then he moved from Marvel to Image Comics, and digital coloring was starting to happen then. And he didn't like it. He wanted something different because he created a character called Hellshock that was very Vertigo influenced. And he asked me if I could color it, but not with digital coloring, which looked very plastic. He asked me if I would color it more in a painterly style, using actually paint, like watercolor or acrylic. And that's what I had seen artists like Bill Sienkiewicz and Dave McKeon and Kent Williams do. So I said yes, but for a monthly comic, what we did was I invented a way that I could paint the pages on paper, and then I could overlap the line art in Photoshop and adjust the colors in Photoshop. So that's how I got my start.
Okay, so do you prefer to work digitally or like in a classical way? Because I think that in the last, like since you first started, the technology really evolved.
Yes, but actually I use a very old version of Photoshop because I don't really use any of the new features of Photoshop from the past almost 10 years. And most colorists that I know work the same way with old versions of Photoshop. I was doing a demonstration for my students in the current Photoshop, and every time you put the mouse over one of the tools, it plays a little video tutorial of how to use that tool. I'm sure that can be turned off, but I was like, I don't need that. I don't need any of that. So I like doing both. You know, comics have so many pages that to do all the pages by hand for an American publisher, it's exhausting because the deadlines are very tight, so you don't have a lot of time to color each page. But I love painting, especially watercolor. And for special projects, I do hand-painted stuff. But for most projects, I do Photoshop with some scan-painted textures and areas they're all mine, things that I make for the comics.
Okay. And so you adjust for each project the color that you will be using?
Absolutely. Every project is different, and every project requires not just different color, but different style of rendering, meaning adding more or less detail, adding more or less texture. So every project has a different, lives in a different world and needs a different set of colors to make it work.
Okay, because you've worked with many artists and some of the biggest name also of the whole comic book history. How do you adapt to these artists? Like, for example, what would be the major difference, like between working with Bill Sienkiewicz or Paul Pope or Jeff Lemire?
Well, honestly, with Bill, who I got to color rather early because I had just began working at Marvel, I was imitating his palette. He's an amazing painter. So my idea of how to color him was to do my version of what he does. Paul had never worked in color, and he met with me, and he told me, he asked for me for Batman Year 100, and he showed me old issues of Métal Hurlant, and we talk about the difference between European colors and American colors, but he didn't want me to copy any of the particular colors. He just wanted more the mood of old European comics. So I pretty much knew what to do with him. For me, it's like with Paul's work, I would just see it in black and white and know what I think the color should be. And with Jeff Lemire, it's similar. He asked for me because he knew me from Top Shelf, and it was his first color comic, and he doesn't really work in color either. And I remember in the first issue of Sweet Tooth, just like the first few pages of Batman Year 100, he gave me some corrections and some ideas, and then after that, never again, just like with Batman Year 100. It was just a few in the first few pages to get started. But I would see Jeff's work and think of color, and he never really gives me any guidelines. And he's very kind, because what he has said to me several times is I would color something for him, and then he would say that it didn't look like what he had in mind, but that it looked better. And so that's very reassuring. And I think both Paul and Jeff really like my colors on them, and I love working on their work.
Okay, you worked also with Richard Corben. What was his how influential was his work to you? Because you worked a lot, and you mentioned in a previous interview, like 7 years ago, that he was like the artist, your favorite artist with whom you've worked.
It is, and he still is. And I feel that when I worked with Corben, I really pursued working with Corben, because he always did his own color. But then when he started working commercially, first for Vertigo and then for Marvel, other people were coloring him. And I thought, I want to be the one. So Axel Alonso assigned me to color Cage. And I basically tried to emulate his own colors, which were very influential to me, like his use of saturated color, complementaries, etc., the best I could. And actually, I was coloring him in the beginning in a very texture way, because he was doing very grainy inking. But he told me to make it smoother, and he made a sample page for me. And I did, of course, what he said. And since then, I worked with him on many occasions. And I learned a lot working with Corben, not just from coloring his work, but mostly from restoring the bulk of the stories that he drew for Warren Publications in the 70s, for creepy and eerie magazines, where he did his own color separations. And I work very carefully in basically taking the images apart and putting them back together. Because of the poor printing that they received at the time, they reproduced unevenly, and I really did my best to make the work look as good as possible. So I worked from original pages. I work with editions from many different countries that I would try to find the best version from, certainly France and Spain, but also from the US and many other printings, and try to get the best of each thing.
Okay, and another question about the different artists you've been working with, like how do you adjust also your style and your rendering to artists who have a very particular style, like J.H. William III, or when you did with Jae Lee, because I guess also it's really not the same thing, and you have to like rethink totally your way of coloring the art.
Yes, each artist is very different. Some artists let me do whatever I want. Some artists give me some guidelines, and some artists are very particular. J.H., the last job we did together was Desolation Jones, and he was extremely meticulous in both how he approached the work and what he wanted in the colors. So basically, he would tell me what he expected in every page and in every panel. And he would tell me what colors he wanted on each panel and in each page. And also, he would say, you know, color this page like Lieutenant Blue Beret, or color this page like Hugo Pratt when Hugo Pratt works in color, or color this page like, you know, Flair Miller with Lynn Varley. It's like, okay. So I would just sort of follow his directive and basically mimic other colorists. And then with J.H., it was very different. J.H. just pretty much let me do whatever I wanted, except in the beginning, he wouldn't want me to use purple because he doesn't like purple. And I told him that I couldn't color if I could not use one of the secondary colors, because it was like playing the piano without hitting a note, that you need all of the notes. So he was like, okay, well, don't use it. So in the first issue of Hellshock, I did a page that was in the computer. It looked completely blue because it was at night. And when the book went to the printer and it came back, it was completely purple. And that was the first job with him. And it was like a full-on purple page. So I know he was horrified, but he never complained again.
Okay, so how would you describe nowadays, and after all these years of working, how would you describe the role of the colorist in a comic book?
Well, I think that some people think that color is mainly decorative to make the pages look pretty. I think that publishers think that because it's easier in the States to sell books in color than to sell them in black and white. So they see the color as a plus for commercial value. And there are many readers that would not read a black and white comic, that would only read color comics. So I feel that what a good colorist does is the color can really clarify the images. It can actually separate them in terms of depth. And so it can create the illusion of three-dimensionality even with flat colors or two tones. But more importantly, a good colorist understands the story and the mood of the story and can actually use the color not just literal, like make each thing the color is supposed to be, but narratively and subjectively. Narratively telling the story with the color, telling us the temperature when it happens, telling us the kind of lighting that's happening, almost like a cinematographer would. And subjectively, by applying colors to create a psychological effect of peace, of violence, of suspense, of horror, whatever it is that the situation demands. And for that, it's very important to get a copy of the script, because the line art doesn't tell you everything that's going on. And so I had some experiences where when I would ask for a script right away, I wouldn't be able to color, and the editor would tell me that normally artists don't ask for scripts. The colorists they work with don't ask for scripts. I was like, well, I'm not another colorist. I need the script. I need to know what a character is saying, what words are coming out of their mouth, in order to know what color the face is going to be, and the background. So that's the most important thing a colorist can do, is to influence the narrative and to add psychological aspect to the work.
So that means that you can work with the artist and the writer, and not just the artist when you're on a project?
Yes, with both, because the artist may not put indication of light sources, for example.
Okay.
And some artists just think in black and white. They don't think in color. So it's very open to interpretation. And the writer may not know it, but they are asking for certain ways for the story to be told.
So, and do you feel that the recognition of the colorist work has evolved also during the last few years? Like, do people know really that the colorist is not just like a makeup artist, like it's more a cinematographer for comic books?
I think that people that care about such thing know. I mean, in the United States, as opposed to France or Spain, colorists have been receiving awards like the Eisner Award or the Harvey Award for many, many decades, since at least the 80s. So anyone who watches those awards, they know that there is such thing as colorist, and that some win awards for the coloring work. Colorists in the US started to be credited in the credits page in the early 70s by both Marvel and DC, which were the only two publishers at the time. When we were able to do things that were more different from each other because of using the computer, some publishers started crediting us in the cover, and some didn't. It depended on the project, depended on the editor. And so I think I've known people that read comics that don't care who is making the comic. I remember I knew this fan of comics, and I told him I was so happy because I was going to work on Fantastic Four. And he told me, well, who's in the comic? Who's in the book? And I said, well, it's Grant Morrison and Jae Lee, and I'm going to be doing the colors. And he said to me, I don't give a shit who's making the comic. I mean, which characters are? Is the Human Torch going to be in it? Blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh, okay. Well, he's not the only one.
That's
so, of
really
course,
good.
somebody like him, he doesn't care. He just wants to read the comic because the characters that he likes appear in the comic. And so other people care a little bit. Other people care a lot. I have friends that read comics that they don't know it because they don't read the credits, but they tell me the stories they like, and I realize that they're all written by the same person, but they don't know this. So it's up to the individual. But in terms of the publishers, like for example, I'm going to be coloring the new version of Aerosmith with
Yes.
Carlos Pacheco and Kurt Busiek, and certainly in the first one, which came out about 10 years ago, Alex Sinclair's name is in the cover in big letters, and he did a wonderful coloring job. That was 10 years ago. Let me see this one. Yeah, this one is
It's a
Mr. Miracle by Mitch Gerards, and he colors his own work, so there is no room for colorists there. But yeah, both Marvel, DC, Image, they put their colorist name in the cover most of the time, not all of the time.
Okay, and is there a difference in like the guidelines of coloring when you're doing like a mainstream project versus a creator-owned project? Do you have more freedom in creator? I guess you have more freedom in creator-owned, but like, do you have guidelines for the colors used by when you're onto a Marvel or a DC project?
Not well. There used to be. I remember, this is many years ago, mind you, like 20 years ago. When I started working for Marvel, I got a phone call where I was told that because I was working for Marvel and not Image, every page had to have bright colors. Every page. And I said, well, the first comic I'm doing has a night scene with people out of costume. And I was told every page has to have bright colors. Of course, I didn't use bright colors, but I wasn't going to argue with that. And so I think that back then, certain editors believed that superhero comics had to be colorful and have very bright, literal colors. But I think a lot of us didn't do it, and they just kind of got used to it. So I think that I see a lot of experimentation with color done in superhero books nowadays. So I don't think that there is a great pressure. I think editors now know that having literal colors in every page is just not a thing anymore. And so there used to be a difference, but I think that difference has sort of been erased. Except I color a children's comic for my friend Judd Winnick. It's called Hilo. And the color in that comic had to be completely 100% literal. Like the characters didn't change colors from page to page. It had to be always the same colors. But that wasn't really mainstream. That was for children, like for little kids. So no, I would say that there's I think equal amount of freedom when it comes to the coloring in the current market.
Okay, and I've got one last question before switching to Infidel. Is there like a medium page rate for colorists in the industry right now? And could you tell our audience what it is? So how is paid a colored page?
Well, some companies pay very little per page. They pay like $25, and the top salaries for pages is about $150.
Oh yeah, all right. That's quite
so
a range.
Yeah, there's a big range, and some of the big companies used to pay more, and now they pay less. So others keep paying well, and then there's special projects that pay more. Now, both Marvel and DC have royalty programs that include colorists. So whenever we work on a best-selling book, we get extra money from the sales.
Okay. All right, thank you. Now switching to Infidel, I noticed that Pornsak Pichetshote was the editor on the Sweet Tooth book, which you were coloring with Jeff Lemire. So is this how you two met, or was it like before?
I think I knew Pornsak before Sweet Tooth. I think I knew him. He was editing. He was Karen Berger's assistant.
Mm-hmm.
So he was his assistant editor, her assistant editor. And Karen and I were about 14 years ago. No, more like 16 years ago. Karen and I were in Naples for a convention. And we got to hang out and had a wonderful time. And I had worked with her since before because she was my first editor at DC. I did a graphic novel for Vertigo. And when we came back from Italy, she got a better rate for coloring Vertigo books, and she assigned me several books. And Pornsak was the editor, and those included Crossing Midnight and Army at Love. And Pornsak asked me to work on a very personal project with him, which was Aaron and Ahmed, which was an original graphic novel. And I will go to New York. I live less than 3 hours away from New York in the train. And I will go to New York and hang out with Pornsak and always have lunch, and we will talk about the industry and comic stuff and personal stuff. So we became good friends. So that's how we got to know each other. And he knew from our discussions that I was a closet editor.
All right. And so how did Infidel come to fruition between you two?
So Pornsak had studied film, and he had written a script for a potential movie, and it never was developed. And he thought at some point that he would like to develop it as a comic series. Now, Pornsak is a very meticulous editor, and he was discussing this with me, and I told him, I said, I don't have to tell you, but I would love to be the editor in this project because I really like the idea of the comic, and because you and I really communicate very well. Also because I know that he's a very, what we call, hands-on editor. He would want somebody to be hands-on with the project and not somebody who just says everything is great all the time, but somebody who actually gives him an honest opinion and suggestions. And so he said yes, and I said, all right. So part of my job as editor was to find an artist, and I thought of Aaron Campbell, who I had known for 10 years. He had graduated from the school where I teach, and I approached him, and he said yes, and the rest is history.
Okay, so and what made you like this particular project? What appealed you to Infidel?
What appealed me about Infidel is that I've worked in hundreds of projects, and the bulk of the stuff that I've done has been entertaining. But most of what I've done has just been entertaining, meaning I feel that at some point I felt that with my work, I wanted to do work that made a contribution to what's out there. And I felt that I did it once with Alan Moore when I illustrated The Mirror of Love, which is a poem that he wrote about the history of gay people. And that was very personal to me. And when Pornsak told me that the subject of this comic, which was about xenophobia and racism, I thought, this is very interesting to me and something that I hadn't seen or read. So I thought it was an interesting story, commercial, but with a message that I felt was very timely.
So because you feel like comics in general and any form of art has also to address society problems for like sometimes.
No.
No.
No. I don't think that any form of art has to do anything because art serves many functions. Art can just entertain you, make you laugh, delight you. It can be romantic, it can be scary, it can be action. So, and that's perfectly fine. I'm talking more about, for me personally, I wanted to do some projects that actually meant something to me, more than just doing something entertaining. But it's not because I think that anybody else should do it, or that it's not good to not do it. Artists should do whatever they want.
Oh, okay, so it was your first experience as an editor. How did you approach it?
Well, I was surprised because I had never edited anything, but I had given feedback for stories before to friends of mine that were artists. I was just remembering today, my friend Antoine Daudet stayed with me for a while here in Baltimore, and he was doing a French comic. And he asked me, and I gave him some feedback about the story, for sure. And then he had this word in Norwegian for the title, and I was like, nobody in France can say that word, and it's just nobody's going to buy it. So he said, what should I call it? So he told me what the story it was. And I told him, I think you should call it Pierrot Lunaire. And he was like, really? Yeah, because the main character was named Pierrot. And he was a specter that appeared into a girls' school. And I explained to him what Pierrot Lunaire was with, Apollinaire and all that stuff. And so he used it. He loved it. So, I have an opinion about many things having to do with comics. This was just doing it officially, So I found that we question everything. We question the title. We question the characters. We question the plot. And then I had some ideas about who lived and who died and things like that, like major plot points. But also, when it came down to like the nitty-gritty of it, Pornsak would send me the pages of script, and I would print them and get a red pen out. And to my surprise, I would just cross certain things. I would change certain words. I would say, this needs another scene in between. I don't know why, but I sort of had an opinion about every word in that script. And there weren't that many notes, but some were a little bold. And I was like, take this with a grain of salt, Pornsak. I don't know what I'm doing. This is not objective, it's subjective. But Pornsak basically took in almost all, if not all, of my notes. And I was glad, because I felt that, of course, I wouldn't make a suggestion unless I believed that it was helpful. I think all these years of teaching, I've been teaching since I was 25. And so all these years of teaching has given me a lot of experience to make suggestions and attempt to address big and small issues in constructive ways.
And the fact that you were both the editor and the colorist, so did you have also to review your colors? Or
No, for the colors, it was clear to me I could not be my own editor because, of course, what I submitted I thought was right. So Aaron and Pornsak were my editors for the color, and they would give me corrections, which was good.
Okay, and so how did you set the color palette for this project?
Well, I discussed it with Aaron. That was mostly Aaron, and he wanted to play against the expectations of the reader, and he wanted a very kind of movie realistic palette for the everyday life, which means pretty desaturated colors that are not very bright. They're not very comic booky. And then when the specters appear, at first they were monochromatic, but later he wanted them to be psychedelic and have a lot of colors in them. So you don't expect that to happen in Ghosts, and it didn't happen right away, but we built up to that. He also did all of the everyday life scenes are done in the computer, but mimicking pen and ink, and all the monsters are hand painted and three-dimensional. So he combined working in pen and ink, in digital pen and ink, with working manually in ink washes. And you don't expect the ghost to be more real, in quotes, than the real life, but that's what he did.
Okay. And so because there's like an assumption that like when you're doing a horror comic book, you have to use certain colors, and like black, obviously, because you're afraid of the dark, and it's like a haunted house story. But like you're also using very bright colors for the ghosts, for some apparitions. So are there any colors that can make you scared?
I think the only color, I mean, I would think that there are colors that can imply mystery more than fear. Like dark colors, what's called shades, can imply mystery. Like not just black, but dark grays and browns and dark purples. For fear, I think the cliche color is red, especially dark red, because of blood and violence. But the color is not going to scare you. It has to be the image. Color itself can just heighten whatever the image is doing. But I don't think, I mean, it would take a, psychologist to know if color can affect a reaction by itself. But certainly as a colorist, I don't see it. As a colorist, I know that the color is only supporting the image, is not overriding whatever the image is.
But like, did you test several colors for some ghosts, for example? Because some of them are like purple or green. So did you do tests, and you were reviewing it with Aaron to see the most striking image you could get?
No. Normally, I do test when something is not a normal color. I do test on my own all the time, but that I don't. I just try, like I try this, and it doesn't work, I try that, it doesn't work, I try this, I like a little better, how about if I do this, and then I do it. So I do that just systematically by myself. And I would just deliver it to Aaron, and Aaron liked, I think, everything up to the end when he really told me to make them more psychedelic. I had colored them more tonally consistent, and he wanted me to heighten an almost iridescent kind of surface for them. He saw them as being, like as the emotions were heightened in those last sequences, he wanted the colors to also be heightened. So that was his own concept. That was his own original idea.
All right. And there's also a question that I asked Pornsak and Aaron that I got in interview like 2 weeks ago. And we were talking about like the society has really changed from the time where the first issue of Infidel was published to today. Like, as an editor, would you change something if Infidel were to be published today?
No, I think that sadly, what has changed in the past 3 years. And a lot of it has been the effect of Donald Trump being in the White House for 4 years, is that this series was conceived before Trump was elected. But Trump has, in the United States, he has, the way he speaks has given permission to people who are racist and homophobic and homophobic too, but xenophobic, to openly express their ideas without fear of embarrassment. In other words, he hasn't created new hatred. He's just revealed that a lot of people feel those ways, and before they were embarrassed to do that because it wasn't socially acceptable. And now it's become socially acceptable in certain states and in certain parts of the population. I think that has had an effect in Europe, and you see it in the rise of xenophobic politicians in France and in Spain, for example, not to mention, Victor Orban and all that stuff. And those are new politicians. In Spain, there was not a party like that until, Trump ascended to power. And they're made from the old right-wing party, but they are not pretending to be moderate. And they're certainly not pretending. Marine Le Pen has done a lot of work trying to hide what the National Front was before she took charge, and what the new political groups are doing are saying, no, fuck that. We really are that way. We really hate foreigners. We really want people to be one way, one language, one religion, one culture, and if they're not like that, they should just get the fuck out of here. So sadly, it's happening not just in the States, but also in Europe and in Brazil and in other countries.
So you wouldn't change anything in the story, or you wouldn't add something to be like more accurate to the to the world?
No, I talked to Aaron and Pornsak about it, and I would have liked to add an extra chapter of story, but not for social commentary, just to give more depth to some of the characters. I think that everything in the comic is very relevant right now, and I think that putting more pop culture references, which is what we could do now, wouldn't really help the story or hurt it. It wouldn't make any difference.
Okay, so what's really funny also about Infidel is that it started out as a script for a potential movie that didn't get made. It was a comic book, and now the rights of the comic book have been optioned for a movie.
Yes, it was optioned really early on when only 3 issues were out. And that's because Pornsak lives in Hollywood. And he was working already. He worked on the DC Comics adaptations for television of DC characters. And so he has good agents, and they sold the rights to the script to a really prestigious producer. And they hired a very prestigious film director, and they had several people working on the script, but the last 2 people that were working on the script are also very good. So, but we're not involved in the adaptation, so we don't know what's going on or what they're doing with it. Pornsak was very clear from the beginning that he was not going to be involved.
Okay, but it feels like it had to be a comic book before having the chance to make it as a movie, because we know that a lot of people right now are searching just for comic book as sort of IPs to be made into movies.
Well, yes, certainly, but you can imagine that you're a film producer and you get 3 things in front of you. One is a novel, one is a script, and the third one is a comic book. The novel is going to take a while to read. The script is going to take a couple hours to read. The comic, you can just flip through the pages and you get a feeling of whether you're interested or not. You don't even have to read it. You can just flip through it, and then you get a feeling of whether that's a story and then you can read it.
Yeah, because it's better if you read it.
So when you have a big pile of proposals, guess which one you're going to pick up first?
Yeah, seems logical to me also if you put it that way. All right. So Jose, you mentioned before that you're working on the new Arrowsmith comic book by Kurt Busiek. What's next also for you? What can you tell us about your next projects in the near future? I know that there are certainly something that you can't tell, but what can you tell?
There's several things I can't tell because I've been more and more I have to sign like non-disclosure agreements. So I can talk about what's in print and what is coming out. I recently finished a project I'm very proud of, which is the colors for The Other History of the DC Universe with John Ridley, who won the Academy Award for Best Script for 12 Years a Slave, and work with Giuseppe Camoncoli, who is a really good friend. And that is a story. It's more like an illustrated book than a regular graphic novel. And it sort of turns the traditional history of the DC characters on its head by narrating it from the point of view of the non-white characters. And so that was very interesting, very, very, very well done from the part of the writer, and the art was very, very fun to color. I could do a lot of design work with the art. And it's coming out in 2 weeks. The hardcover is coming out in 2 weeks. It hasn't been, for sale yet. I just finished a Witcher graphic novel for Dark Horse. That's an original graphic novel with a German artist, and who does beautiful work. It's based on one of the original Witcher stories called A Grain of Truth, which I just saw is being adapted for the second season of the Witcher TV series. Okay. And that was wonderful. I worked with Dark Horse for many years, for 6 years, coloring Conan. And this felt a lot like working on Conan, except it was even more stylish because the owners of the property really wanted something very painterly. So that was really fun. Arrowsmith, I've been getting ready to work on this for 2 years, but finally I have many of the issues drawn, and I'm coloring the second issue right now. It's going to be 6 issues to begin with, and it's the best work that Carlos has ever done, and he's done a lot of great stuff. But this is the most personal project to him, and it's difficult to color because the work is very intricate. But I think that he's getting me to do some of my best work too, because the line art is so good. And then, other than that, I just finished editing an illustrated book by a comics artist, which is Das Pastoras, who has worked both in the French market, including part of the Meta Byrons series with Jodorowsky called Kastaka, but he's also worked extensively for Marvel. He's done Wolverine, he's done Thor, he's done The Punisher, and this is a illustrated version of a retelling of the first Spanish book that told the labors of Hercules. So it was published by a comics publisher in Spain called Nuevo Nueve, and I'm really thrilled with it. And we're preparing other projects as well. And I have 3 things that I've been working editorially. None of them can be announced, unfortunately, but one of them, the story is almost finished, and the other 2 are in different stages of development. They all have different subjects, and but all of the stories that I'm doing as editor, the one thing they have in common is that I want them to be contributions I don't want them just to be another story, like something that people have read before.
All right, great. Lots of good stuff to come, I guess. So we'll be waiting for the announcements and the books to be out. So thank you very much, José, for your time and to have answered our questions.
My pleasure. Anytime you want to follow up, you know where to find me.
I know. And I will just conclude in French. So, j'espère que cette émission vous a plu sur le métier de coloriste et sur cet album Infidel, donc disponible chez Urban Comics et qu'on vous a déjà pas mal encensé, mais on en remet une couche parce que vraiment c'est à mon sens, une bande dessinée vraiment importante et vraiment si vous aimez l'horreur, c'est quelque chose qui est vraiment assez incroyable à lire. Donc vous avez un lien dans la description si vous voulez vous la procurer chez nos amis lyonnais de Comic Zone. N'hésitez pas à nous faire vos retours dans les commentaires sur notre site et sur les réseaux sociaux. Puis on vous rappelle que les Super Friends sont là, ils sont précieux, on les chérit. Donc il faut les partager le plus possible pour à la fois faire subsister le podcast sur Internet et aussi mettre en avant le travail de toutes ces belles personnes qui passent sur nos ondes. Merci de nous avoir écoutés et à très bientôt pour le prochain podcast.